welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now, I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book Pray for Him, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. The carriage rolled to a stop at Praia de Botafogo, coming from the cemetery. Pedro and Paulo had just laid the commendador to rest. This life had ended the day before, taken by typhoid fever. At first, they rode in silence. Then, they talked about the new houses in the neighborhood. Eventually, the conversation turned to the dead man, sparked by the sight of a house he had sold 3 months earlier. "You know what?" Paulo said. "That house was sold too cheap." Pedro thought for a moment. Maybe. But money earned the wrong way never brings good luck. Paulo shook his head. Not in this case. The commendador was honest. Maybe not the smartest, but honest. "Not stupid," Pedro replied. "He was clever. Very clever, in fact." "Well, a man can be clever and still be a fool," Paulo said. "He had instinct and experience, sure. But he couldn't tell one idea from another. Just like in those shareholder meetings. That's when they began to talk about his speeches. No way those speeches were his own," Paulo said. "He memorized them." Pedro nodded. "It's the only way it makes sense." Can you imagine someone memorizing a speech for a shareholder meeting, where everyone talks over each other, and no one listens? He couldn't handle interruptions. If someone cut him off, it ruined his whole point. And he never argued back, not once. Paulo added, when he spoke first, you could almost believe he was thinking on his feet. But if he was second or third, you could see it clearly. "That's why he always tried to speak first," Pedro said. "I don't know," Paulo said. "He seemed to know what he was talking about." "He was good with business." "Oh, he was good," Pedro agreed. "But he didn't write those speeches. He learned them by heart." "In telling you," Paulo said, "I know who wrote them. The lawyer from the Banco Económico." "Makes sense," Pedro said. They were full of legal references. One even had a Latin quote. "Yeah, and everyone made fun of the lawyer for that," Paulo said. "No, wait," Pedro replied. "That was probably the commendador's idea. He loved showing off Latin." "I remember," Paulo said. "I had to sit through a few of those speeches at his house. Me and my wife, the night before meetings." "Same here," Pedro said. "Same here." The sun was just starting to dip toward the ocean, casting a golden glow over the beach where 2 old friends walked side by side. Pedro had begun the conversation by saying he wanted my opinion on the order of his thoughts. But the truth was, he barely connected 2 sentences before pretending to improvise a full speech just to see the effect it would have. After the first time he gave one of these speeches and the newspapers published it, he told me, "It was good that we talked about it the day before. I organized my ideas, and you saw how the speech came out almost exactly the same." Almost the same. We both laughed. The beach looked beautiful that day, and for a few minutes they talked about it. But soon enough, they returned to the subject of the late man, whose life they examined in detail. Pedro refused to believe the man had been honest. Paolo, on the other hand, insisted he had been there was nothing bad to say about him in that regard. He wouldn't sacrifice himself, that's for sure, Paolo admitted. Or do anyone else any favors, Pedro added. Do you remember what he did to me? Paolo said he did, but that didn't stop Pedro from telling the story again, the story of his deep disappointment. 10 years earlier, when Pedro was trying to set up his business for the first time, he had asked the late man, a man of some wealth, to borrow 15,000 rei. He promised to pay it back in 2 years, with 8% interest. But the man who had just donated 10,000 rei to celebrate some event in Paraguay refused. Maybe he didn't have the money at the time, Paolo suggested. Don't be naive, Pedro snapped. He was just cheap. We didn't talk for a while after that. But later, when I was finally doing well, he came looking for me to propose a business partnership. We made peace, but I made sure to say a few things that left him pale. Paolo changed the subject, steering the conversation away from the past disagreement and on to the late man's many quirks. They began sharing stories, jokes, and funny mistakes, ridiculous sayings, pronunciation errors, silly behavior. Paolo told one story that made them both laugh, after reading a novel by Dumas set in the French court. The late man became obsessed with kissing his wife's hand every time he entered or left the house. But the wife didn't play along, and the habit lasted only 5 days. Pedro winked and smiled. He was a fool, he agreed. Paolo leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed as he thought. Did you notice how he walked? He had this way about him, like he was trying to impress everyone. He was proud, even of his beard. I swear, every time we stood together, head pull at it, looking down like he was checking for something, but really, he just wanted people to notice how soft and shiny it was. Pedro nodded slowly. And what about music? He always acted like he knew everything about it. He'd talk about singers and composers like he was some kind of expert. Whenever an opera company came to town, that's all he'd talk about for weeks. He even bought a subscription to the theater just to make people think he was crazy about music. But honestly, I bet he didn't even like it that much. No, he really did like it, Paolo said. I know. He liked it, sure. But he made it seem like he loved it more than he did. That's right. Then, they started talking about the late man's strange habits. Paolo couldn't stand how he used to make the sign of the cross on his lips with his thumb every time he yawned. And there was another thing, how he'd click his tongue against his teeth, like he was cleaning them in front of everyone. Pedro didn't know much about those habits. He hadn't visited as often as Paolo had. You went there every night, didn't you? Pedro asked. Not every night, Paolo corrected. We sometimes played cards, yes. Voltarete mostly. But as soon as a third person showed up, I'd stop. I don't like card games. What about his wife? Did she play? Donna Josefina? Never. Of course she did. She played Bisca with you, 2-player style. Bisca? Paolo repeated, a little too quickly. Oh, come on. Everyone knows that already.
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.